Hi, with Julian on the Brown Note and a review of the 7th album, I think, by UK shoegaze titans Ride, who I have a long history of supporting, all the way back to them probably being my first indie band that I was into. Given that bands in the UK in the 80s that I was really into, like New Order and the Smiths, were already quite big when I sort of got there, even in like being 12 years old, they were still pretty big acts. And, you know, even being there fairly early on in those bands' careers, I remember hearing Ride on the John Peel Show, the first EP, Chelsea Girl and Drive Blind, and getting it when it came out. I've still got it on vinyl. And probably seen them, I think it was 11 times over the next few years, and some, for me, iconic gigs. The Town and Country Club, the Brixton Academy one, which was filmed, supporting the Pixies in front of a lake at this Crystal Palace Bowl, coming on before The Cure in this really weird Wembley Arena gig when The Cure were on the Disintegration tour. A lot of memories, all the way down to their collapse. So Ride were this shoegaze band out of Oxford in 1988 and were part of the holy trinity of shoegaze, which was Slowdive, My Bloody Valentine and Ride. And Ride were known as the best live band out of the lot, and also the most dynamic act. And I still say that their first year is the equal of any UK alternative music act in history, because they released three EPs and an album. The three EPs themselves were a classic album of material, and Nowhere, their debut album. I wish they'd go back and properly package those three EPs into an album. They have sort of done that, but it deserves to have the credit that Nowhere has. And then Nowhere, a flat 10 out of 10 album for me. They also got into the charts in the UK with their second EP, Play. I think just about made the top 40, and they were a very prominent act, a lot more dynamic than the sort of Slowdive were always a lot more dreamy in the background, and have got latent acclaim. My Bloody Valentine had done Isn't Anything, and then just blew the world apart with Loveless, but there was a big gap between those two albums, and nothing after that. Ride then became the focal point of shoegaze around sort of 92. Leave Them All Behind got into the top 10 in the UK, their epic 8-minute single, and the album Going Blank Again also was a massive hit for them, a double album. And then it all went to hell in a handbasket with the advent of Oasis and Britpop, taking a stranglehold on the most dynamic music scene in UK music history since probably either the late punk, post-punk era or the late 1960s. And Ride were part of that UK music press, which was brilliant at the time, but also incredibly vindictive and vicious and fashion conscious. And they went after shoegaze bands as being the scene that celebrates itself and promoting Britpop acts. And I've mentioned on 100 reviews on my radio show, I never go back and listen to Britpop at all. I'm not going to go back and listen to Park Life. I don't go back and listen to Definitely Maybe. And what came after that was actually much worse. And like many UK music genres, like two-step and garage, for instance, they died such a quick death that they didn't get sullied like Britpop did with becoming landfill indie and having Ocean Colour Scene and Cast and the Kaiser Chiefs and Kaiser Sabian and all these, and they were the top ones. Like, there was many worse. Sullied the genre to the point where I can never go back to it. Same with grunge. I can't really listen to grunge that much, even though I did at the time. I'd happily listen to Siamese Dream or Copper Blue by Sugar above listening to, say, Nevermind or 10 by Pearl Jam. It was just a bit overdone. But like those, like I said, two-step and garage, they died such a quick death that they left a good-looking corpse. So they remained really fashionable. And around the start of the 2000s, there were these acts like M83. Their like initial run of albums was phenomenal. And Beach House, and these acts coming through that reference shoegaze and dream pop a lot. And then it's become more and more trendy, to the point where, last year Paranol was in my top 10 albums, top 5 albums of the year, second album by that South Korean anonymous act. And there are just a raft of modern shoegaze bands like Dive and so on. And it's become this very trendy music genre, and it was one of the most heartening things to see. Within the space of a couple of years, My Bloody Valentine, Slowdive and Ride all returned with new albums that were really good, and live tours, which was amazing. I mean, I went from 1 week not having heard a My Bloody Valentine album for 20 years to watching them live. I live in Sydney, and they did a live concert about 3 days after the release of that MBV album, and played like the whole of Loveless, which is just mind-blowing. For me, out of that holy trinity, Ride get the least respect and deserve the most. I thought the My Bloody Valentine album was superb. 1/3 of it was trading on the past, 1/3 of it was kind of like in the middle, and 1/3 of it was pointing at the future. The live concert I saw, it was all bar one track old music. Slowdive's album, the first one that came out, was, I think, probably the best album of the 3 groups on release. I really didn't rate the last album, but that said, they really traded on past glories with that music, and even were very post Beach House. I thought Ride were the band that traded least on former glories, and were really offering something that was incredibly new. It was an imagination of the band, as though Carnival of Light, an album I detest, where they went from shoegaze, a very expansive version of shoegaze on Going Blank Again, into Britpop, and into this faux Small Faces twee version of the brilliant Small Faces. But this was a twee version of it, and I didn't like it at all. This was a ride that imagined that Going Blank Again wasn't followed by Carnival of Light. It was followed by the albums. The band are Andy Bell, Los Cobert, Mark Gardner and Steve Querrell. And the rebirth, after a gap of 21 years, was Weather Diaries in 2017, and in 2019 This Is Not a Safe Place. Ironic. And I think there was 1 or 2 EPs as well, and I saw a couple of tours in Australia. Eventually they went down the nostalgia route, which was wonderful. I saw the Nowhere 30th anniversary tour last year, which was absolutely fantastic, where I got that t-shirt actually. So now they're back. Now the one thing I would say about their music, all of their albums have got 2 or 3 fantastic tracks to add to their live repertoire. They've been too polite. I wish they'd have pushed more. When they've done something experimental on those albums, I've gone like, I wish you were doing this all the way through. I would give both Weather Diaries and This Is Not a Safe Place a 7 out of 10 each. And there's lots of music on those albums I really like, and a lot of it is a bit mid. Fairly mild, and when I saw them playing a lot of this music live, the live versions of it were a lot more sort of combustible and dynamic. Well, the new album's come out, Interplay, and I have to say I've been blown away by it, because it is everything that those 2 albums weren't. I know this is a dumb thing to say, but up until Carnival of Light, I bought every Ride record on vinyl, and they had the best cover game in town. Those early EPs on these beautiful matte cardboard sleeves, which I still have all of them, were stunning. And even when they flipped over to going for the gloss covers, the first few of them were actually really, really good. And even the Nowhere cover of That Wave is iconic. And the new albums, their artwork has been crap. But this new album, Interplay, the artwork is beautiful. I know that doesn't mean anything, but I can often tell that an album's going to be good, one by the cover and two by the song titles. I don't know why it marries up. I don't know if it's something to do with the headspace, like creatively the band are in, but if I start looking down the playlist and seeing very, very rote titles, or if I look at the album cover, it's a big warning sign like a movie trailer. But Interplay is fantastic. The initial singles that came out showcased a more expansive sound stage. It was wider and fatter, and it had elements of synth pop in it, and it was also more urgently melodic than their polite other material, I feel. That was very sort of nice but background. This was a lot more sort of urgent sounding, like it was trying to grab your attention, and hookier. And the three songs I thought were all interesting in different ways. It's arguable to say that Peace Sign is perhaps, which was the first one that came out, is perhaps the worst of the bunch, and it opens the album, but it does showcase a really good soundstage. It's just a lyric that is absolutely appalling. The lyric in the chorus, "Give me a peace sign, wave your hands in the air," is some of the worst lyrics they've done and designed for festival audiences. It reminded me uncomfortably of the John Squire Liam Gallagher album, imaginatively titled Liam Gallagher John Squire, which I recently gave the lowest score I've ever given any album to, which has the worst lyrics I've ever heard. It's saved by sort of post-new romantic synths, quite an insistent beat, and I was pleased that the drum sound wasn't too compressed, sort of like that Travelling Wilburys post-ELO compression would have killed the song for me, and it wasn't. It did sound more like a drum kit. And throughout, this is the album where Steve Queralt, his bass playing is almost like Derek Forbes in Simple Minds. It rescues so much of what's going on. And it's got an energy to it as well, so it is a festival throwaway song. I thought the second track, Last Frontier, and I suspect that Andy Bell, one of the twin songwriters alongside Mark Gardner, is responsible for the opening tracks. I wonder whether Mark Gardner's lyrics are better than Andy's at times. I think Andy is now concentrating still on personal relationship stuff with a rhyming dictionary. Sorry, mate. Andy's got Mark Gardner's lyrics seem to have got a lot more political. But the melody of Last Frontier, like, it opens with this Love Will Tear Us Apart beat, the opening of Love Will Tear Us Apart, and I think that one of the defining factors of what I found most engaging about this album is the band are laying all of their references on the table. It is full of really interesting influences, very much also a sort of softer New Order song with a Peter Hook bass line, and the fact that Andy does his vocal, I think it's Andy on this song, in this really spoken word delivery that's quite unusual for them. I love the fact on this album that they do musically elements that I found quite unusual, and when he does his very spoken word vocal melody on the verses, I found it very, very arresting, and it's got such a strong melody. And when he does that, it made me feel like I was listening to the Lightning Seeds. It's really got a lovely verse, and the way it modulates towards the end, where it's got this sort of like pause and goes through a couple of chord changes, very, very catchy, and a definite Love Will Tear Us Apart tribute on the coda, which I thought was lovely as well. The first real jink away from those widescreen singles is Light in a Quiet Room, which has got this huge Spaceman 3 vibe, and an unusual distance between Gardner and Bell's vocals, which are often paired very close to each other in like vocal harmonies. Here he's like, I think Gardner's doing like this Gregorian chant stuff in the background, and it's one of many songs where Steve Queralt's bass is really arresting and elevates everything that's happening, and it's got this pulsing synth. They've got some of their most effective use of electronic textures, and then it drops off at the halfway stage into a proper shoegaze feedback meltdown. perhaps leaning towards the fact in future live sets this might replace the long-standing 10-minute wall of sound feedback from the breakdown in Drive Blind. It made me think of Flying Saucer Attack. Their album Further from the 90s is one of the most beautiful atmospheric shoegaze albums. I thoroughly recommend it. Very low-key act called Flying Saucer Attack. And yeah, it was the most... They haven't done that guitar feedback on their previous two post-comeback albums at all. Monaco track 4 is the brashest of those singles. I really liked it. It's got a very sort of New Order Crystal era fullness to the sound. Another unusual vocal in the way that Mark Gardner's almost got this affected post-new romantic, but it's not a treated dreamy vocal at all. It's very direct, unusually so for him, and I feel a lot of his lyrics nowadays are quite polemic and political, which is good. I'll go more in that area. Over the Edge We Go, big chords, by miles already the most exciting opening four on their post-comeback albums. And I feel it's an album where the cohesion really is of great importance, because the first four tracks for me fit an opening third, and then you've probably got another four maybe, and then a final third, and they all seem to occupy different spots. I think the middle third is a weaker, but that's still not a weak selection of songs. It's just not quite as good as that stunning opening. There's a really strong Depeche Mode stomp and again bass on I Came to See the Wreck, track 5. That song's saved from being completely mundane by the incredibly loud squalling feedback of the second half of it, which is the most shoegaze I think they've been. It was fantastic. Almost like Slow Dive around the era of She Calls, where they had these big sheets of guitar noise, and indeed Ride on Nowhere, which I absolutely loved. And I also, alongside that Depeche Mode vibe, that's the one place I heard the mooted Tears for Fears song from the Big Chair era, Grandiosity. I could definitely see that coming through. Another very different arrangement for them is track 6, Stay Free, which has got this cop shoot cop spiritualized sort of doom doom, and almost like Swans if they're being acoustic, which is really interesting, but perhaps again a more ordinary song in the middle of the album. Last Night I Went Somewhere to Dream. It could be another twee fest like the opener, and is a little bit. Again, the mid songs would all rank up as my least favourite, but still not bad in any way. But the bass and the drums again are fantastic, and the incandescent guitars through it as well, like really stinging and melodically beautiful, really do raise the song. And I think that's the midsection over with, and there's a transitional track which could also be quite, if in the wrong hands, including rides, could have been horrible. Sunrise Chaser, as it leans a little bit into cod reggae, very slight bit, but it's not. It's actually really interesting. It's got another very strong bass line, and almost Cafe Del Mar ride. Have we ordered that yet? It's got that chill out vibe to it, and a lovely tumbling rhythm section as well. And I love the fact that it sort of transitions between a little bit sort of less urgent middle tracks and then bringing back the strength of the melodies on the rest of the album. And I think that's going to stand the test of time. And then we get into the final third, which is easily the rival for the first, but not a repeat of it. Midnight Rider almost reminded me of Black Rebel Motorcycle Club. And in fact, the first time I listened to the album, I was disappointed in the final third, and it really has grown on me as being much more successful than I thought after like 3 or 4 plays, and I'm probably up to about 8 plays by now. It's got this, Midnight Rider's got this great sort of rolling beat with this stinging guitar going on. Annie Bell does a lot of great stinging guitar motifs on this album. feels a bit halfway between Drive Blind and Moonlight Medicine, which is a good place to be. And it's got this really post-Manchester baggy beat on it as well. And that's where the album's really coming back into focus. And 10 is Portland Rocks, which is a lot of people's standout from the album. Very much in the vein of OX4, this sort of incandescent slow burner. It's got these really big crunchy Nowhere era drums on it, and sounds like a song that's been in Ride's repertoire from the early 90s. It's huge and very melodic and very noisy wall of sound. It's fantastic. It's got that early sort of Taste era Ride, Birdsian jangle, and the vocal melodies being quite close together, reminding me a bit of a very noisy Birds. And it's obviously going to be a live staple from now until the end of Ride. And then we just drop off in the final two tracks for some completely unexpected arrangements and songwriting. Esawari, 100,000 Ride fans found out that I can't pronounce it, is a town in Morocco, which is one of the most unusual pieces of music. Really, I think this one's Andy Bell, and instead of being like a twee love song, the lyrics are incredibly fatalistic and dark. It's almost like life's going to be absolutely terrible, but you know, we'll get over it, I guess. It's just really dark. And I thought fantastic and curiously compelling, because it doesn't ever reach out and go for some big bombastic element. It just sort of leans back into its arrangement, which felt quite confident and like a come down after like the huge wall of sound of Portland Rocks. Again, like a dark Cafe Del Mar track, and it ends on a track called Yesterday Is Just a Song, which I thought had really fatalistic lyrics, and reminded me of Pigs on the Wing. You know, the opener and closing acoustic tracks on Pink Floyd's Animals? It kind of felt like that, yet it's on this very woozy synth pads. And I like the fact that it had the confidence not to try and, like the previous track, not to try and introduce more band elements. It just sort of woozed along. And then it just introduces this quite poignant synth line to play out the album, which reminded me of the Blade Runner soundtrack, which is not bad. So overall, this is a much more exciting album than the previous albums, where I would have dug harder to find the nuggets. Here I was like, okay, this is actually really, really good. In fact, you know, a near perfect if it wasn't for a midsection where it's occasionally more mundane in songwriting, but even then, half of those tracks have really, really strong elements to them that are very interesting. But the opening and closing thirds are the best stuff. Overall, the best album they've done since Going Blank Again. Very unusual compositions at time, which I wanted. Reintroduction of loud guitars and feedback, which I wanted. More interesting lyrics from, I think, probably Mark Gardner, which I wanted. And a cohesion across the tracks that feels like they were building the album. So this is a great album, and it won't get any attention because I don't get the attention they deserve. But I'm confidently, and not being, a Ride sado, in saying that this is a 9 out of 10.